He never imagined that fixing a broken fence for an elderly neighbor would cost him his quiet, predictable life and hand him a future he couldn't have dreamed of in 1,000 years. This is the true story of a struggling single dad, a reclusive multimillionaire, and the moment a simple act of kindness triggered a legal and emotional earthquake that would leave an entire town questioning everything they thought they knew about the woman living behind the overgrown hedge. The handyman was Mark Evans, a 34-year-old single father just trying to keep the lights on. The neighbor was Agnes Miller, a woman the quiet suburb saw only in glimpses, who lived alone in a decaying house at the end of a long, tree-lined drive. Their arrangement was simple. He would fix things, she would pay him in homemade pies and quiet conversation. But when Agnes died at 93, her will revealed a secret worth over $40 million and named Mark as the sole beneficiary, igniting a firestorm of suspicion and a single, burning question. Was this a reward for kindness or the masterpiece of a master manipulator? To understand the bomb that was about to detonate in Mark Evans's life, you have to understand the fragile world he was trying to hold together. It was a world of overdue notices, of calculating the cost of groceries down to the penny, and of trying to explain to his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe, why they couldn't get the puppy she dreamed of. 2 years before the lawyer arrived, Mark's life had fractured. A divorce finalized, a modest house sold to split the equity, and a new reality in a cramped 2-bedroom rental on the less polished side of Willow Creek. Child support and rent consumed most of his income from a patchwork of handyman jobs. His truck was 12 years old and made a sound like grinding rocks every time he shifted into third gear. Every day was a physics problem of balancing forces, work enough to pay the bills, but be home enough for Chloe. It left no room for error and certainly no room for $40 million surprises. Agnes Miller's house was the quiet landmark at the cul-de-sac's end. A sprawling, once-grand Victorian wrapped in oak trees, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin. Shutters hung at tired angles. To the neighborhood kids, it was the haunted house. To the adults, it was a mystery wrapped in overgrown lilac hedges. The only signs of life were the weekly grocery delivery and the soft glow of a single lamp in an upstairs window each evening. Mark first saw her in early spring. He was pressure washing a driveway 3 houses down when he noticed the sagging section of her backyard picket fence. A week later, a windstorm finished the job, leaving a 10-foot gap open to the woods behind the property. He watched for days, expecting a repair crew. None came. It nagged at him. It was a safety thing, an invitation for animals or worse. So one Saturday, with Chloe at her mom's for the weekend, he loaded his tools into his groaning truck and drove to the foot of her long, crushed stone driveway. He didn't have a plan, just a vague notion of offering a free estimate. He knocked on the heavy front door, the brass knocker echoing in what sounded like an empty hall. After a full minute, the door opened just a crack, secured by a brass chain. One pale blue eye peered out from the gloom. "Yes." "Hi ma'am, I'm Mark Evans. I live down the street. I couldn't help but notice the damage to your back fence after that storm. I'm a handyman. I'd be happy to take a look, give you a quote to fix it." The eye studied him. The silence stretched so long he started to retreat. "I don't need a quote," the voice finally said, softer now, "but you can take a look." The chain rattled, and the door opened just enough for him to slip through. Agnes Miller was in her late 80s then, thin and straight as a ruler, her white hair in a careful bun. She wore a simple, faded floral dress. The house inside was a time capsule. Dark wood, heavy velvet drapes drawn against the sun, the air smelling of lemon polish and old books. It was impeccably clean but felt still, like a museum after hours. She led him wordlessly through the kitchen and out the back door. The fence was worse up close, posts rotten at the base. "This isn't a quick fix," he said, kneeling in the damp grass. "The posts are gone. I'd need to replace 3 of them, reset the whole section. It's probably a 2-day job." "Can you do it?" she asked. "I can, but materials alone for pressure-treated lumber." She cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Do the job right, I'll pay for the materials and for your time." He gave her a number, a fair price that made his stomach clench to say aloud. She just nodded. "Start Monday." That Monday began a pattern that would define the next 2 years. Mark worked steadily, replacing the posts, carefully aligning the new pickets to match the old. Agnes would appear mid-morning, carrying a tray with a glass of iced tea and a plate of cookies. She'd set it on the porch step without a word and go back inside. Later, she'd return to sit in a wicker chair, watching him work, sometimes asking a question about the technique. When he finished on Tuesday evening, presenting her with the receipt for materials, she took it, disappeared inside, and returned with a check for the exact amount, and a still warm apple pie in a glass dish. "For your labor," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. He was confused. "The labor was in the total, Mrs. Miller. The check covers it." "The check is for the wood and the nails," she said firmly. "The pie is for the skill and for not treating me like I'm made of glass. It's Agnes." That was the first pie. It became their currency. Over the next few months, a loose floorboard in the hallway led to a cherry pie. A dripping kitchen faucet earned a peach cobbler. He refused to take money for what he considered small jobs, and she refused to let him work for free. The baked goods became their treaty. He learned snippets about her. She'd been a librarian. Her husband, Henry, had died 15 years earlier. They'd had no children. She loved classical music and historical biographies. She was fiercely independent and startlingly sharp. When he mentioned offhandedly that Chloe was struggling with her reading, Agnes later presented him with a carefully selected stack of children's books from her own shelves. "Tell her a librarian prescribed these," she said. For Mark, these visits became an oasis. Here was someone who didn't see him as a struggling divorcee or a barely making it handyman. She asked about his ideas for restoring old furniture, about the history of the craftsman bungalows in town. She treated his knowledge with respect. In return, he did more than fix things. He brought her mail up from the box, changed a few high-up light bulbs, and once spent an afternoon clearing the gutters of oak leaves. He never asked about her family. He never saw a photo of Henry. The silence in the house felt deliberate, a moat she had drawn around herself. The rest of the neighborhood saw a recluse. Mark began to see a woman who had simply decided the world outside her gate wasn't worth the trouble anymore. 2 years slipped by. The fence job led to repairing a porch step, then to fixing a stubborn old window. Mark's financial tightrope walk continued. A major repair on his truck wiped out his meager savings. The threat of a rent increase loomed. The pressure was a constant, low hum in his veins. His time with Agnes was the only part of his week where that hum quieted. Then, on a cold Tuesday in November, he arrived for a scheduled job to weather strip some drafty windows. The curtains in the front room were still drawn tight at 10 a.m., unusual for her. Her daily newspaper was still in its plastic sleeve on the front step. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He knocked, then knocked louder. He called her landline from his cell, hearing it ring faintly inside. Nothing. Using the spare key she had given him months before for emergencies, hidden under a specific flower pot, he let himself in. The house was silent and dark. "Agnes," his voice echoed in the hallway. He found her in her favorite armchair in the sitting room, a book open in her lap, as if she had simply fallen asleep. But she was cold to the touch. She was gone. The following days were a blur of police, a gentle coroner, and the quiet procedures for someone with no next of kin. Mark made the necessary calls, feeling like an intruder. He attended the small, stark funeral service at the town's cemetery, arranged by a lawyer whose name he found in her desk. He and the lawyer were the only two people there. As they stood by the fresh grave under gray sky, the lawyer, an older man named Robert Gable, turned to him. "Mr. Evans, you were Mrs. Miller's primary contact. You should know she was very specific in her instructions. There will be a reading of her will next Thursday at my office. Your presence is requested." Mark nodded numbly. He assumed it was about some final small payment for his last job, or perhaps she'd left him one of her books. He thought nothing more of it until he walked into the wood-paneled office that Thursday, still wearing his work jeans, and found 3 other people already seated around the conference table, all of them staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The air in the room was thick enough to slice. Robert Gable, the lawyer, sat at the head of the table, a thin folder before him. To his right was a severe-looking woman in her 60s, her lips pressed into a bloodless line. Next to her, a man in a charcoal suit representing something called the Historical Preservation Society. And finally, another lawyer, younger, with an expression of cold appraisal, who Mark would learn represented a distant cousin. "Mr. Evans, please have a seat," Gable said, gesturing to the empty chair. Mark sat, acutely aware of the dried paint splatter on his jeans. Gable cleared his throat. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Agnes Lillian Miller, dated and notarized 6 months ago. I will summarize the pertinent details." He opened the folder. After specific bequests of personal effects and a sum of $50,000 to the Willow Creek Historical Society for the maintenance of the town library archives, the man in the suit gave a slight, satisfied nod. The entirety of the residuary estate, that is, all remaining assets, properties, and holdings, is bequeathed to Mark Stephen Evans to be held in trust for his benefit and for the benefit of his daughter, Chloe, until she reaches the age of 25. A stunned silence filled the room. Mark's brain stuttered, unable to process the legal language. The entirety, he pictured the old house, its contents. Maybe it would cover Chloe's college one day. A strange, weightless feeling bubbled up. Then Gable delivered the sentence that changed the axis of the world. Preliminary valuation of the estate, including the real property, liquid assets, securities, and the proceeds from various trusts established by the late Henry Miller, is estimated at $41,200,000. The number didn't land. It bounced off. 41 million. It was science fiction. It was a typo. Mark stared at Gable's mouth, waiting for him to say thousand instead, but the lawyer just looked back, his expression unreadable. The severe woman was the first to break. "Preposterous." The word was a whip crack. "This is an obscenity." She was a vulnerable old woman, isolated and confused. And this contractor asterisk, she spat the word, waltzes in and inherits a fortune. I am her cousin, her only living blood relative, and I contest this document in its entirety. The cousin, Evelyn Shaw. Mark would later learn she lived 3 states away, hadn't seen or spoken to Agnes in over a decade, but had kept a sharp eye on the property value assessments. The Historical Society lawyer shifted. "My client, of course, is grateful for its bequest. However, the disposition of the Miller estate, particularly the main house, which is an unregistered but significant example of late Victorian architecture, has broader implications for the community. We would urge any beneficiary to consider its stewardship carefully." The cousin's lawyer spoke next, his voice smooth as oil. "Mr. Gable, given the extraordinary nature of this bequest to a non-relative caregiver and the documented statutes in this state regarding prohibited transferees, we must insist on an immediate probate freeze. We will be filing a motion to contest on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity." The terms swirled around Mark, prohibited transferee, undue influence, They were arrows aimed at his chest, but he was too numb to feel the hit. All he could manage was a hoarse whisper. I never asked for anything." Gable held up a hand. "The will is legally sound. It was prepared by me with Agnes Miller of sound and fully capable mind. She was sharper than anyone at this table. She gave clear, specific instructions. However," he said, looking at Mark with something that might have been pity, "a contest is their right. The process will begin." The meeting dissolved into a low buzz of hostile murmurs and the shuffling of papers. Evelyn Shaw shot Mark a look of pure venom before sweeping out. The other lawyers followed, already talking in low tones. Mark remained in his chair, glued to the leather. Gable waited until they were alone. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a list. It wasn't just the house. It was a stock portfolio. It was municipal bonds. It was a numbered account at a private bank in Zurich. It was ownership of a small, profitable patent firm she'd inherited from Henry. The decaying Victorian was just the tip of an iceberg, a physical placeholder for a fortune built over generations and left to quietly compound in the dark. "She wanted you to have this," Gable said quietly. "She was very clear. She said you were the only person in 20 years who treated her like a human being and not a problem to be managed or a vault to be cracked. She called you her friend." Mark's hand trembled as he picked up the paper, the numbers blurred. Why me?" "Because you were kind," Gable said simply, "and in her experience that was the rarest currency of all. But Mark, you need to understand, what just happened here is the opening salvo. They will come for you. They will attack your character, your motives, your relationship with her. The law presumes a caregiver who benefits this heavily has exerted undue influence. The burden will be on you and on me to prove otherwise. This isn't over, it's just begun. Walking out of that office into the bland afternoon sunlight felt like stepping onto another planet. The world looked the same, his dented truck waited for him, but everything had fundamentally changed. He drove home in a total silence, the lawyer's warnings echoing in the hollow space where shock used to be. He didn't tell anyone, not that night. He picked up Chloe from school, made mac and cheese, helped with her homework. He watched her small, earnest face, the innocent trust in her eyes, and the enormity of it all crash down. 41 million, a lawsuit, the word presumption of fraud. His quiet, difficult, but honest life was gone. The storm broke within 48 hours. It started with a phone call from a reporter at the local paper asking for a comment about the contentious Miller inheritance. Then another. By the end of the week, it was a front-page story. Local handyman inherits millions from reclusive heiress. Family cries foul. The narrative was set before Mark could even draw a breath to explain. Mysterious fortune, lonely old woman, opportunistic laborer. Willow Creek turned on a dime. The quiet nods from neighbors became averted eyes and whispered conversations in the grocery store aisle. He was accused online of being a grifter and a predator. Parents of Chloe's friends suddenly found reasons for playdates to be cancelled. His phone rang with calls from distant acquaintances and outright strangers, some offering investment opportunities, others hurling abuse. The most crushing blow came from an unexpected quarter. His ex-wife, Lisa, called, her voice tight with a new, cautious formality. "Mark, people are saying things. They're saying you manipulated this old woman. Chloe is hearing things at school. Kids are saying her dad's a thief. We need to talk about custody. Until this is settled, I don't think it's a good environment for her." It was a tactical strike, leveraging his love for his daughter to inflict maximum pain. He sat on the floor of his silent living room that night, the darkness pressing in, realizing that the money, the abstract, life-changing number, wasn't a blessing. It was a target painted on his back, and it was drawing fire onto everything he loved. Robert Gable's office became a war room. "They've filed the formal contest," Gable told him, spreading documents across his desk. "Evelyn Shaw is the named contestant. Her argument is twofold. First, that Agnes lacked mental capacity due to isolation and age. Second, and this is their heavier weapon, that you exerted undue influence. They've subpoenaed your financial records, your business accounts from the last 5 years. They're going to look for any hint of desperation, any pressure you might have applied." "There wasn't any," Mark said, the defiance feeling weak. "I know, but they don't need proof to make the accusation. The law's presumption does the heavy lifting for them. We have to dismantle it. We need to build a portrait of your relationship that is so clearly benign, so clearly based on mutual respect, that the court can't deny Agnes's intent." Gable steepled his fingers. "We need to find people who saw you together. We need to document every interaction, every pie, every conversation. We need to prove her state of mind. And we need to be prepared for them to dig up every mistake you've ever made." The invasion was total. Detectives hired by the cousin's lawyer interviewed his old clients, asking leading questions about his prices, his reliability. They tracked down his former suppliers. They tried to speak to Chloe's teachers to gauge his character as a father. The town's opinion solidified into two camps: a small group who thought it was a beautiful story, and a much larger, louder group convinced it was a scandal. Mark's work dried up. No one wanted the millionaire handyman in their home, either out of jealousy or suspicion. The pressure mounted, a financial vice tightening just as it had before, but now under the blinding glare of public scrutiny. He was paralyzed, unable to touch a cent of the inheritance because it was all frozen in probate, yet being judged as if he already had. Then the letter arrived. It was from a firm in the city, representing the Willow Creek Historical Society. It was not a lawsuit, but a carefully worded proposal. Given the uncertainty of the estate's ownership and the historic significance of the Miller house, they proposed Mark voluntarily sign over the property to them for preservation in perpetuity. In return, they would drop any support for Evelyn Shaw's contest and offer a small finder's fee. The threat was veiled but clear: "Fight us, and we throw our weight behind your enemy." Mark showed it to Gable, who snorted. They smell blood in the water. They see a protracted legal battle you can't afford to fight. They're betting you'll settle, give up the house for pennies to make it go away. It's a squeeze play. That night Mark drove to the Miller house. The FOR sale sign the estate had put up was already tilted, a casualty of wind or vandalism. He stood at the end of the driveway, looking at the dark windows. This house, this beautiful, lonely shell, was the epicenter of the earthquake destroying his life. He thought of Agnes sitting in her chair, seeking only quiet and a little kindness. He had given her that, and in return, she had given him a war. He remembered the last real conversation they'd had, about a month before she died. She asked about Chloe's reading. He told her she was improving, thanks to the books. Agnes had smiled, a rare, full smile. "Good," she'd said. "The world tries to make us hard, Mark. Don't let it win. Keep her soft. It's the bravest thing you can do." Sitting in his truck, staring at the dark house, Mark made a decision. Running, settling, giving in, that was letting the world win. It would prove every ugly accusation true. He had done nothing wrong. Agnes had made a choice. A clear, conscious, kind choice, and he would fight for her right to have made it. He called Gable first thing in the morning. "Tell them no," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Tell the cousin, tell the historical society, tell everyone, no deals, we're going to court, I'm not giving up a single brick of that house." The relief in Gable's voice was palpable. "Good. Now the real work begins. We need a weapon. We need something that proves, beyond any doubt, Agnes Miller's true intentions and her clear, unimpeachable state of mind. We need to find what she left behind that wasn't in the will." Mark paused. "What do you mean?" "A woman that careful, that precise, doesn't just leave a will," Gable said. "She leaves a record, a diary, letters, something. We need to find her voice, before the other side tries to silence it forever." The search for Agnes Miller's voice began in the one place everyone had overlooked, the house itself. While lawyers filed motions and the town gossiped, Mark and Robert Gable obtained a court order for supervised access, allowing them to inventory the home's contents before the probate freeze locked it down completely. They moved through the silent rooms like archaeologists, a court-appointed observer trailing them. They opened drawers filled with linen pressed 40 years ago. They examined shelves of books, many first editions. In a small study, Gable found the expected documents, tax returns, property deeds, the records of a meticulous mind. But no diary, no personal letters. It was as if Agnes had sanitized her emotional life from the record. "It's not here," Mark said, frustration rising. "She was private. She wouldn't leave something just lying around." Gable was about to agree when Mark's eye caught on something in the sitting room, the old writing desk. He'd repaired a stuck drawer on it months earlier. Agnes had been strangely flustered that day, hovering nearby until he finished. He walked over, running his fingers along the seam where the drawer met the desk. He remembered a slight discrepancy, a depth inside the drawer that didn't match the outside dimensions. He'd chalked it up to old craftsmanship. He pulled the drawer all the way out, set it on the floor, and reached into the cavity. His fingers brushed against wood, then against something softer. Leather. A flush of adrenaline hit him. Taped to the back of the drawer cavity was a slim, locked journal bound in brown leather. The court observer stepped forward, making a note. Gable's eyes widened. "Don't open it here," he murmured. "It goes into the court's custody as potential evidence, but we can petition to have it examined." The journal became the center of a new legal skirmish. Evelyn Shaw's lawyers argued it was part of the estate's physical assets and should be sealed. Gable argued it was testamentary, a direct expression of Agnes's intentions and vital to determining her state of mind. After a tense hearing, the judge ruled in their favor. The journal would be opened and transcribed in the presence of both legal teams. The day of the transcription felt like a countdown to a verdict. They gathered in a sterile conference room at the courthouse. A neutral clerk, wearing white cotton gloves, carefully picked the simple lock. The first page was dated over 50 years ago. The entries were sporadic, sometimes years apart. Early pages spoke of Henry, of their hopes, of her work at the library. Then after Henry's death, the entries grew shorter, darker. "The silence is a physical thing," one entry read. Evelyn called again, asking about the trust. "The sound of her voice is like ice water." The legal team scanned the transcripts as the clerk worked. The journal painted a portrait of a woman who chose isolation not out of confusion, but as a defense against a world she found increasingly transactional and cruel. She wrote of the vultures in her family, circling after Henry died. She detailed, with cold clarity, her decision to cut them off. They see an inheritance, not a person. I will not pay for false affection. Then 2 years ago, an entry appeared. A young man fixed the fence today. He has a kind face, and he didn't speak to me like I was simple. He has a little girl. He reminds me of Henry in his practicality. It was a relief to hear the sound of work in the garden again. Mark's breath caught as he read his own name appearing in Agnes's precise script. She wrote of their conversations, of the pies, of his quiet reliability. Mark asked nothing. He is the first person in a long time who has taken nothing. He simply is asterisk. A good man. It is a novelty. The final, crucial entry was dated 6 months before her death, around the time she signed the new will. Met with Robert today. It is done. I have left it all to Mark and his Chloe. Robert argued for a more conventional structure, but I am decided. The money is tainted with the memory of greed. Let it be washed clean by an act of no greed at all. Let it go to someone who didn't fight for it, who didn't even know it existed. Let it be a surprise, the only gift worth giving. Gable looked across the table at Evelyn Shaw's lawyer, a faint, hard smile on his face. The journal was a cannon aimed directly at the heart of their case. It documented her sound mind, her deliberate rejection of her family, and her specific, thoughtful reason for choosing Mark. It was her voice, clear and unassailable. But the opposition wasn't finished. If they couldn't attack Agnes's mind, they would attack Mark's character with renewed ferocity. The next revelation hit the local news like a grenade. Inheritance beneficiary has criminal record. When he was 20, fresh out of trade school and desperate for cash, Mark had gotten into a fight outside a bar. It was a stupid, drunken brawl. He'd been charged with misdemeanor assault. He'd paid a fine, done community service, and it had been expunged from his record a decade later. He never mentioned it to anyone, not even Lisa. It was a buried ghost from a life he'd left behind. Evelyn Shaw's legal team had unearthed it. They spun it into a narrative of latent aggression, a hidden propensity for coercion. The headlines did the rest. Heir's violent past revealed. The town's suspicion curdled into certainty. The small camp of supporters fell silent. Mark sat in Gable's office, feeling the walls close in. It was 20 years ago, he said, his voice hollow. It was nothing like this. It doesn't matter what it was, Gable replied, his usual calm fraying. It matters what they can make it look like. A prior act of violence, however minor, gives weight to their theory of undue influence. It suggests a capacity for intimidation. The journal helps, but this hurts. Badly. The personal toll became unbearable. Chloe came home from school sobbing. A group of kids had surrounded her, chanting, "Your dad's a jailbird robber." Lisa filed an emergency motion for full custody, citing the toxic environment and Mark's newly revealed character issues. The hearing was swift and brutal. The family court judge, wary of the media circus and the assault charge, granted Lisa temporary primary custody. Mark's visitation was reduced to supervised Sundays at a family center. The day he had to explain to Chloe why she couldn't come home was the day Mark truly broke. He wept in his empty apartment, the weight of it all, the fortune he couldn't use, the name he couldn't clear, the daughter he was losing, crushing him into the floor. Gable, seeing his client unraveling, made a desperate move. He hired a private investigator not to defend Mark, but to go on the offensive. "If they want to dig up dirt," Gable said, "we'll dig deeper. We need to know everything about Evelyn Shaw, every lawsuit, every financial dealing, every reason Agnes might have had to despise her." What the investigator found was a goldmine of hypocrisy. Evelyn Shaw had her own history of contentious inheritances. She had sued 2 other elderly relatives over their wills, settling both times for small sums. She had a bankruptcy in her past. More damningly, phone records subpoenaed by Gable showed a pattern of calls from Evelyn to Agnes in the months before her death, calls that lasted less than a minute, suggesting Agnes was refusing to speak to her. The final call was the day after Agnes had signed her new will. It lasted 12 seconds. Gable filed a counter-motion, painting Evelyn not as a wronged relative, but as a predatory figure Agnes had specifically sought to escape. The narrative in the media began to twitch, the first sign of doubt in the monolithic Handyman versus family story. Then came the deposition. Mark was subjected to 8 hours of grueling questioning by Evelyn Shaw's lead attorney. They went over every interaction with Agnes, every pie, every conversation, looking for inconsistencies, for any hint of manipulation. They pressed him on his finances, on the assault charge, on his desperation. Mark, coached by Gable, answered with exhausted honesty. He had nothing to hide because there was nothing to find. But at the end of the day, as the court reporter packed her machine, the opposing attorney leaned forward. "One last thing, Mr. Evans. Did you know that Agnes Miller was diagnosed with early-stage macular degeneration 2 years ago, that her eyesight was failing?" Mark froze. No, she never mentioned it. So you weren't aware that, in her final year, she could barely read the newspaper, that she needed help identifying the denominations of her own money? "That's not true," Mark insisted. "She read all the time, she gave me books." The attorney smiled, a thin, victorious curve of the lips. "We have medical records and a statement from her ophthalmologist. We'll introduce them as evidence of her deteriorating faculties and her increased vulnerability. Thank you, Mr. Evans, that's all." It was a masterstroke, a new, credible medical fact that supported their claim of incapacity. The journal's clarity could be framed as the ramblings of a confused woman. The pies and conversations could be reinterpreted as the actions of a lonely, impaired elder being taken advantage of. Gable's face, as they left the deposition room, was grim. The goalposts had just moved again. That night, Robert Gable presented Mark with a choice. The trial was looming. They could fight on, but the cost would be astronomical, and the outcome was now a true toss-up. The medical diagnosis was a serious blow. Alternatively, Evelyn Shaw's side had floated a settlement offer through back channels. Mark would receive a lump sum of $2 million, free and clear. The house and the remainder of the fortune would go to Evelyn. The legal nightmare would end. He could walk away rich, rebuild his life, and potentially fight for more time with Chloe once the spotlight was off. $2 million is life-changing money, Mark," Gable said gently. "It's not 41, but it's security forever. You could buy a house, secure Chloe's future, start over. A trial could take years and drain you mentally and financially, even if we win." Mark stared out the window at the darkening street. $2 million was an escape hatch. It was vindication of a sort, an admission that he had some claim. It was the pragmatic, survivalist choice. It was what everyone expected him to do, take the money and run, proving his greed all along. He thought of Agnes's last journal entry. Let it be a surprise, the only gift worth giving. She hadn't given him $2 million, she had given him a choice. She had trusted him with her legacy, her final act of defiance against a grasping world. To settle was to betray that trust. It was to agree with Evelyn Shaw that Agnes's clear, written wishes were the product of a failing mind. He turned back to Gable, his own eyes clear for the first time in months. "No," he said, "we don't settle, we go to trial. I'm not fighting for the money anymore, Robert. I'm fighting for for her right to give her gift to whoever she wanted. And I'm going to look Evelyn Shaw in the eye in front of a judge and a jury and tell them exactly who Agnes Miller was." The trial of Miller v. Evans began on a gray Tuesday morning, the courtroom packed with reporters, curious townsfolk, and the palpable tension of a community about to witness its own story judged. Evelyn Shaw's legal team opened with a clinical, devastating portrait. They presented Agnes Miller as a frail, isolated woman, her world shrinking with her eyesight. They entered the medical records into evidence, the ophthalmologist taking the stand to confirm her diagnosis. They painted Mark as a man drowning in debt, who saw a vulnerable target and systematically inserted himself into her life. The 20-year-old assault charge was presented not as a youthful mistake, but as a character flaw, a proven capacity for force. They argued the journal was the unreliable product of a fading mind, her affection for Mark a symptom of her impairment and his manipulation. For 3 days, Mark listened as his kindness was forensically dismantled and recast as a long con. He sat stiffly beside Robert Gable, feeling the jury's eyes on him, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. Then it was their turn. Gable's opening was simple. This case is not about medical records or old mistakes. It is about the sovereign right of a sound-minded woman to give her property to whomever she chooses. Agnes Miller was not confused. She was precise, deliberate, and making a final, powerful statement about what she valued. Called witnesses the town had forgotten. The owner of the grocery delivery service testified that Agnes called every week with a meticulous, unchanged order and had angrily corrected an error on her bill just 2 months before she died. A former colleague from the library, now in her 80s, spoke of Agnes's formidable intellect and her lifelong, deep-seated contempt for familial greed. She used to say, the woman recalled, that blood was the thinnest excuse for entitlement she'd ever heard. Then Gable called Mark to the stand. It was the moment everything hinged on. For an hour, Gable led him through the story of the fence, the pies, the conversations. Mark spoke quietly, without embellishment, about fixing her faucet, about her love for Brahms, about the day she gave him the books for Chloe. He described the quiet companionship, the absence of any request or expectation. When Gable asked him directly if he had ever asked Agnes for money or hinted at his financial struggles, Mark's answer was a firm, quiet no. Why not? Gable asked. Mark looked at the jury. Because she was my friend, you don't do that to a friend. The cross-examination was brutal. Evelyn Shaw's attorney went back over every financial hardship, every late bill, trying to force Mark to admit he saw Agnes as a solution. Isn't it true, Mr. Evans, that a $41 million solution fell into your lap and you simply didn't say no? Mark met his gaze. I didn't know there was a lap. I thought I was just fixing a fence. The climax came when Gable called a surprise rebuttal witness to the medical testimony. He had hired an independent geriatric psychiatrist who had reviewed all the records, the journal, and the testimony. Under Gable's questioning, the psychiatrist dismantled the opposition's argument point by point. Macular degeneration affects central vision for tasks like reading, the doctor explained. It does not affect cognition, memory, or reasoning. Many patients with the condition develop excellent compensatory strategies. The journal shows sophisticated, linear thought, wit, and clear recall of past events. This is not the writing of someone with compromised mental faculties. This is the writing of someone who is, if anything, sharpened by her circumstances. He then addressed the heart of the matter. Undue influence isn't just about being nice to someone. It requires a pattern of coercion, isolation, and control. There is zero evidence Mr. Evans isolated Mrs. Miller. He visited periodically to do repairs. The evidence shows she had long ago isolated herself from her family by her own choice because of their behavior. What you have here is not undue influence. It's the opposite. It's gratitude. It's the recognition of a rare quality in another person. To pathologize, that is, to misunderstand human connection entirely. The closing arguments were study in contrast. Evelyn Shaw's attorney spoke of blood, of family, of the natural order of things being violated. Gable spoke of autonomy, of friendship, and of the right to define one's own family. He held up the journal. Agnes Miller's voice is in this room, he said to the jury. She told you exactly what she was doing and why. She chose to reward a selfless act in a selfish world. The question before you is simple. Will you honor her clear, deliberate wish, or will you invalidate it because you find its results surprising? The jury deliberated for 2 days. For Mark, it was an eternity of silence and dread. He avoided the news, stayed in his apartment, and counted the minutes until he could see Chloe for their supervised Sunday visit. She hugged him tightly and asked, "Is it over, Daddy?" He could only say, "Soon, baby, soon." The courtroom was even more packed for the verdict. Mark sat with his hands clenched under the table. Evelyn Shaw sat rigidly, her face a mask of entitled expectation. The forepersons stood. On the matter of the last will and testament of Agnes Lillian Miller, we the jury find in favor of the defendant, Mark Evans. The will is valid. A collective gasp, then a buzz of noise filled the room. Mark slumped forward, a wave of dizzying relief washing over him. Gable gripped his shoulder. Across the aisle, Evelyn Shaw's mask shattered into pure, furious disbelief. She stood abruptly and left the courtroom without a backward glance. The legal war was over, but the personal reconstruction was just beginning. The probate freeze was lifted. The fortune, with its daunting number, was formally his. The first thing Mark did was pay Robert Gable his substantial fees. The second thing he did was nothing. He didn't buy a sports car or a mansion. He didn't quit working. He spent weeks in a state of quiet shock, the reality of the wealth feeling less like a prize and more like a profound responsibility, Agnes's final lesson to him. He made two significant decisions. First, he established an irrevocable trust for Chloe, ensuring her future was secure no matter what. Second, he reached out to Lisa. He didn't fight her for custody with his new financial weapons. Instead, he asked to meet without lawyers. Over coffee, he spoke plainly. The trial proved I'm not a predator. I just want to be Chloe's dad again. I don't want to buy her or you. I just want my time back. Lisa, seeing the exhaustion and the lack of gloating in his eyes, finally relented. The supervised visits ended. Slowly, tentatively, they rebuilt a functional co-parenting relationship. The poison of the lawsuit gradually neutralized. With the town, the change was slower. Some people would always see him as the lucky grifter, but many others, seeing the verdict as a vindication, began to thaw. He started getting handyman calls again. He accepted them. He still drove his old truck, though he finally got the transmission fixed. His relationship with the Miller house was the most complex. He couldn't live in it. The memories were too heavy, too intertwined with the trauma of the trial, but selling it felt like a betrayal. Gable presented a solution. Using a portion of the estate's funds, Mark established the Agnes Lillian Miller Foundation. He donated the house and its contents to the foundation, with a mandate to preserve it as a writer's retreat and community archival center, fulfilling the Historical Society's stewardship dreams, but on his own terms. The director's salary, it went to Evelyn Shaw's cousin, who dropped all further appeals in exchange for a stable, dignified income, finally getting a piece of the Miller fortune without having to win it. And then a final discovery. While overseeing the archiving of the house's contents for the foundation, a curator found a second, smaller journal tucked inside Agnes's old piano bench. This one contained no personal thoughts. It was a ledger. For decades, Agnes had been anonymously paying off medical debts for families at the local hospital. She had been quietly funding scholarships for trade school students at the community college. She had been supporting the animal shelter. The amounts were careful, never traceable back to her. The last entry was a note. The money must do good in the dark. Its public face is too ugly, but it can still be a gentle thing. Mark realized then that her gift to him wasn't an aberration. It was the final, grandest expression of a lifelong, secret philosophy. She hadn't given him the money because he was kind. She had given him the money because he was kind, asterisk, without knowing there was money, asterisk. He had passed her unspoken test. 5 years later, on a bright Saturday morning, Mark Evans stood at a newly built community center on the outskirts of Willow Creek. The Chloe Evans Learning Center focused on literacy and vocational skills for teens and adults. It was funded entirely by the foundation. His daughter, now 12, stood beside him, ready to cut the ribbon. The town mayor gave a speech about generosity and second chances. The local paper took photos. As the crowd applauded, Mark looked out and saw a mix of faces, old clients, former detractors now offering hesitant smiles, and a community beginning to weave a new story about the handyman and the heiress. He no longer thought of the money as his. He thought of it as a river that had suddenly flooded his banks, and his job was to direct its flow to fertile ground, as Agnes would have done. He still lived simply. He still fixed things. The difference was the quiet hum of fear. The fear of bills, of losing Chloe, of not being enough was gone. In its place was a steady, profound gratitude. He often visited Agnes's grave, not out of obligation, but for conversation. He'd tell her about the foundation's work, about Chloe's latest report card, about the new batch of apprentices learning carpentry skills at the center. He never felt her presence, exactly, but he felt the enduring weight of her choice, a choice that had shattered his old life and demanded he build a better one. The fence he fixed that first day still stood at the back of the Miller property, now part of the writer's retreat. The pickets were weathered but strong. He'd repaired it himself during the renovation, a full-circle moment. It had been the first link in a chain of events that led here, to peace, to purpose, to a legacy that was finally about building things up instead of just fixing what was broken. The world had tried to make him hard. It had accused, attacked, and isolated him. But in the end, Agnes's gamble had paid off. He had kept himself soft, and in doing so, he had turned a fortune born from isolation into an engine for connection. The gift had been a surprise. The real inheritance was learning how to give it away. The story of Mark Evans and Agnes Miller forces us to confront a difficult, beautiful question. What is the true value of an act of kindness when no one is watching, and what is the true cost of that kindness when everyone finds out? We are drawn to these tales of unexpected inheritance because they feel like a fairy tale, a moral equation where decency is rewarded with riches. But reality, as Mark learned, is far messier. The legal system, designed to protect the vulnerable, often views profound gratitude with profound suspicion. The California law that marked Mark as a prohibited transferee exists for a vital reason, to stop predators, but in doing so, it can also punish the purest form of gift. Agnes Miller's life became a secret ledger of quiet good, her final, public act the grandest entry. She didn't just give Mark money, she gave him a crucible. She forced him and everyone around him to reveal their true nature. The cousin revealed her greed, the town revealed its bias, and Mark, under unimaginable pressure, revealed his resilience and his fundamental goodness. He proved her right. The greatest wealth he inherited wasn't the $41 million. It was the unshakable knowledge of his own character, tested and proven true. These stories are vanishingly rare for a reason. Most fortunes follow well-worn paths of bloodline or bureaucracy, but when they do erupt into public view, they hold up a mirror. They ask us what we would do in Mark's worn work boots. Would we take the settlement? Would we bend under the weight of a town's contempt? Would the money transform us, or would we find a way to transform the money? In a world that often feels transactional, where relationships are scored and interactions have hidden costs, the raw, inconvenient goodness of this story is a disruptive force. It suggests that the most powerful currency isn't dollars, but decency, that the most lasting legacy isn't a portfolio, but a pattern of care that ripples outward long after you're gone. Agnes's fortune is now a foundation. Mark's hands still fix things, but now they also build futures. The fence still stands. The choice she made, to trust a stranger with her life's work, altered the trajectory of a family and a community. It all began not with a grand gesture, but with a simple decision to say yes. Yes to a repair, yes to a conversation, yes to seeing the person behind the overgrown hedge. So the next time you have the chance to offer a seat, to fix a fence, or to extend a hand without expectation, remember this story. You will almost certainly not inherit a fortune, but you might just inherit something more valuable, a clearer understanding of who you are, and the quiet, world-altering power of choosing kindness when the balance sheet says it doesn't pay. If you found this journey into the human heart compelling, make sure to subscribe. We delve into the true stories that blur the line between ordinary life and extraordinary legacy. Thanks for watching.